It was supposed to be a warm, joyful birthday dinner with my family. But instead, my phone lit up with a text that shattered everything. You're not our priority right now. My own parents, right there at the table, ignoring me, prioritizing their screens over me on my birthday. I felt invisible, abandoned in the moment I needed them most. So, I made a decision that night, one that changed everything between us forever. My name is Mia. I'm 26 years old, living in a bustling city where everything moves fast, jobs, social lives, and family dynamics included. I've always been a person who craves connection, especially with my family. But honestly, that connection has never been easy to come by. Growing up, my family was far from the picture-perfect, warm, and affectionate kind you see in movies. Instead, it was a house full of silence, interrupted mostly by the constant buzzing of phones and the glare of computer screens. My parents, my mom and dad worked demanding jobs. They were always busy. Their schedules seemed to come first, and somehow I was always on the back burner. Don't get me wrong. They provided for me. They paid for my education, made sure I had a roof over my head and food on the table. But emotionally, it felt like they were miles away, even when they were right in the same room. Birthdays, holidays, family gatherings, those were supposed to be the times when we all came together. At least that's what I wanted to believe. But more often than not, those moments turned into scenes where my parents' attention was on their phones, their work calls, or just the TV playing in the background. Conversations were short, distracted, and surface level. Despite all that, I never stopped hoping. I hoped for a day when my parents would look at me and really see me not just as their child who needs to be provided for, but as a person with feelings, dreams, and struggles. I longed for warmth, affection, and to feel like I mattered. When my 26th birthday was coming up, I decided to do something a little different. Instead of just waiting for something to happen, I took the initiative. I organized a small, intimate birthday dinner at my apartment and invited my parents. I cooked their favorite dishes, decorated the table with candles and flowers, and even picked out a playlist of songs we used to listen to together when I was a kid. I wanted it to feel special. I wanted them to feel special. Most of all, I wanted to feel connected to them. The day of the dinner arrived and I was buzzing with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. I wore my favorite dress, made sure everything was perfect, and waited anxiously by the door when they arrived. At first, it seemed like a typical evening. My parents chatted a little, complimented the food, and said the usual polite things. But I noticed their eyes kept darting down to their phones. Texts, emails, social media notifications they couldn't seem to resist. I tried to ignore it. I told myself, maybe they're just tired, maybe work is stressful, maybe they don't realize how it feels. But deep down, I knew that something was missing. That night, I wanted more than polite small talk and distracted glances. I wanted their full attention, their presence. Looking back, I can now see that this was more than just about a birthday dinner. It was about the cracks in our relationship that had been widening for years, the unspoken distance that had become normal. This was the family I had, complex, imperfect, and emotionally distant, and I had to decide what to do with that. As the birthday dinner progressed, I tried my best to engage my parents. I asked about their work, their health, little things that might spark a genuine conversation. But every time I looked up, though, their attention was pulled elsewhere, to their phones, to some urgent message or notification that seemed far more important than me sitting right in front of them. At first, I told myself to be patient. Maybe this was just one of those nights. Maybe their jobs had been incredibly stressful lately, and I needed to cut them some slack. But the uneasy feeling in my chest grew heavier. Something wasn't right. I could feel it before I saw it, that cold, dismissive energy in the air. Then right there on the screen of my dad's phone, a message popped up that made my heart stop. "You're not our priority right now." Those words flashed boldly, stark and unyielding, as if carved into stone. And the worst part, I wasn't even the recipient. The message wasn't meant for me, but it felt like it was aimed straight at my soul. I tried to convince myself I had misread it, but the damage was done. It wasn't just a text message. It was the reality of how they felt about me, or at least how they behaved around me. I looked from my dad's phone to my mom's. They were both focused on their screens, barely acknowledging me. The room felt smaller, colder. The warmth I had hoped for was nowhere to be found. I swallowed the lump in my throat, trying to hold back tears. I wanted to speak up, to ask why I was invisible, why their phones mattered more than the person who was celebrating her birthday. But the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I sat there feeling more alone than ever. This was the moment when I realized that the distance between us wasn't just about busy schedules or distractions. It was deeper. It was a deliberate choice, whether conscious or not, to push me aside, and it hurt. Not just the feeling of being ignored, but the crushing realization that maybe after all these years, I didn't matter as much as I thought. I could see my parents' faces, distracted, tired, but also indifferent. They didn't even seem to notice the hurt they were causing. The silence between us grew louder, filled with things left unsaid and feelings ignored. At that moment, I made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't keep pretending this was okay. I wouldn't accept being treated like an afterthought on my own birthday, because sometimes love isn't shown in grand gestures or fancy gifts. Sometimes it's in the simple act of being present, of making someone feel seen and valued. And that night, I didn't feel either. As the dinner went on, the painful divide became impossible to ignore. I felt my heart breaking quietly, piece by piece. The birthday candles flickered, casting shadows that mirrored the emptiness in the room. When the evening finally ended, I didn't wait for the polite thank yous or awkward goodbyes. I stood up, left my chair, and walked away, leaving behind not just the dinner table, but a family dynamic that had been slowly suffocating me for years. After walking away from that birthday dinner, the silence between me and my parents only grew louder, almost deafening. What was supposed to be a night of celebration had turned into the breaking point of years of neglect and emotional distance. In the days that followed, I tried to reach out, hoping for some kind of explanation, or at least an acknowledgement of how hurt I was. I sent texts, called their phones, even dropped by their house a few times. But every attempt was met with cold indifference or worse, complete silence. My parents never apologized. They never asked if I was okay. They acted as if nothing had happened, as if I was the one who had caused the tension. It was as if I had become invisible, not only in that moment, but in their lives altogether. At work, my mind was a mess. I couldn't focus. The usual things that brought me joy, my job, my friends, even hobbies, suddenly felt hollow. Every time I thought about my family, the pain tightened around my chest like a vice. I began questioning everything. Was I overreacting? Was I too sensitive? Maybe I had expected too much from people who had never been emotionally available. But then moments like that birthday dinner kept replaying in my mind. The cold texts, the distracted looks, the way their phones took priority over me. I realized this wasn't just a bad night. It was a pattern, and patterns don't change unless someone wants them to. My mom texted me once a brief message that said, "We're busy, Mia. Don't take it personally." It felt like a slap disguised as an excuse. Busy? Busy wasn't an excuse for ignoring your own daughter on her birthday. That message stung worse than any argument. I wanted to scream at them to make them understand how deeply their words and actions had wounded me. But all I could do was sit alone in my apartment, crying silently into my pillow. Days turned into weeks. My parents' absence wasn't just physical anymore. It had become an emotional wall I couldn't climb. And every day that wall grew taller. The rare times I did see them, the conversations were cold and superficial. There was no warmth, no apology, no hint that they cared about how I felt. Instead, they would glance at their phones, nod distractedly, and retreat into their own worlds. I started feeling like a stranger in my own family. Even my friends noticed the change in me. "Are you okay?" they asked gently. I wanted to tell them everything, but how do you explain the ache of being ignored by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally? I felt like I was drowning in loneliness. One night, after a particularly painful phone call where my mom barely spoke, and my dad was distracted by work emails, I sat in the dark, tears streaming down my face. I realized I couldn't keep living like this, caught between hoping for their love and facing the harsh reality of their neglect. Something had to change. That night, I made a decision. If my family wasn't going to show up for me, I would have to show up for myself. I started writing a journal, not just about the events, but about my feelings, my hopes, my frustrations. It was the first time I was honest with myself, admitting how much their coldness had hurt me, how lonely I felt, and how angry I was. Writing became my therapy. Slowly, I began setting boundaries. When they called me with half-hearted apologies or excuses, I didn't accept them blindly anymore. I asked for the respect and attention I deserved. I told them clearly I won't accept being treated like an option. I'm worth more than that. Of course, that didn't sit well with them. They accused me of being dramatic, ungrateful, even selfish. But for the first time, I didn't back down. This pushback only made me more determined. I realized their inability to change wasn't my failure, it was theirs. I started focusing on building my own life friendships that were real, a career that gave me purpose and self-love that no one could take away. But the pain of their rejection lingered like a shadow. One day, I overheard my parents talking on the phone. My dad was complaining about me, how I was too sensitive and expected too much. My mom sighed and said, "We try, but she just pushes us away." Hearing that broke something inside me. They didn't see me. They didn't try to understand. They just dismissed me. I wanted to confront them, but instead, I walked away. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It felt like a chasm. Around that time, I started seeing a therapist. Talking to someone who truly listened helped me process years of pain. I learned that I wasn't to blame for their coldness. I learned that sometimes the people we love most can't give us what we need. And I learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes you have to walk away from the people who hurt you the most to protect yourself. As I grew stronger, I started to rebuild my life. I made new friends who treated me like family. I found joy in simple things: morning coffee, weekend hikes, late night talks. And most importantly, I started to forgive myself. Forgive myself for wanting love, for feeling hurt, for setting boundaries. But even as I healed, the memory of that birthday dinner and that cruel message stayed with me. It was a scar, a reminder of what I refused to accept anymore. One evening, months later, I returned to that same dining table. I wrote a letter, not angry, not bitter, but honest. I left it where they would find it. A note explaining how their actions made me feel how I deserved better, and how I was choosing to prioritize myself now. I didn't expect an immediate response, but I needed them to know that I wasn't invisible anymore. That night, as I left their house, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I was letting go of a past that had held me hostage, and for the first time, I was stepping into a future where I was my own priority. Months passed since that painful birthday dinner, and in that time, I had grown stronger than I ever imagined. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, focusing on my career, my friendships, and most importantly, my own self-worth. I was no longer the invisible daughter waiting for my parents to notice me. Then, one day, out of nowhere, I received an unexpected message from my parents. They said they wanted to meet and talk. The tone was apologetic, almost desperate. I could feel the weight of months of neglect in their words. But I had changed, and I knew that whatever happened next, I would no longer be the same person who silently endured their coldness. When we met, their apologies came fast and shaky. They said they regretted ignoring me, that they hadn't realized how much their actions hurt me. They asked for forgiveness, hoping to mend the broken bridge between us. But I looked at them, really looked, and saw the same distracted expressions beneath the words. It wasn't the genuine care I'd yearned for. It was regret, born from their own discomfort, not from truly understanding my pain. In that moment, I made a choice. I told them that forgiveness wasn't instant, and that rebuilding trust takes time, but only if they were truly willing to change. I explained how their priorities had hurt me deeply, and how I had learned to prioritize myself instead of waiting for their love. To their surprise, I said I wouldn't rush back into the family they had kept distant for so long. They nodded, humbled and speechless. After that meeting, I felt a new power within myself. I realized that the true revenge wasn't about punishing them or making them suffer. It was about reclaiming my life and happiness despite their neglect. That's when I took a bold step. I started a project I'd been dreaming of for years, launching my own nonprofit to support young adults struggling with family neglect and emotional abandonment. I wanted to turn my pain into purpose to help others who felt invisible in their own homes. The project quickly gained momentum. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers reached out to support the cause. I gave talks, shared my story openly, and inspired others to find strength in their struggles. Meanwhile, my parents watched from the sidelines. They saw me building something meaningful, gaining respect and admiration from people who truly valued me. They realized that despite their absence, I had thrived. That realization was their karma. One day, I was invited to speak at a large conference about overcoming family trauma and reclaiming self-worth. The event was covered by local media and quickly went viral online. My parents happened to see the coverage, their daughter, the one they once dismissed, standing strong and inspiring thousands. I received messages from them afterward, this time not just apologies, but admiring words and requests to reconnect. But I knew better. I understood that their newfound interest was more about pride and appearance than true understanding. So, I kept my boundaries firm. I answered politely, but didn't rush back into old patterns of dependence or forgiveness. Instead, I focused on continuing my mission, growing stronger, and surrounding myself with people who genuinely cared. In the end, the greatest revenge was my success and happiness, a life they tried to ignore but couldn't erase. And that truth, more than anything, gave me peace. Looking back, that painful birthday dinner marked a turning point in my life, not because of the hurt it caused, but because of what I chose to do afterward. I stopped waiting for my parents to be the people I needed them to be. Instead, I became my own priority. I learned that love isn't just about blood ties or shared birthdays. True love is about respect, presence, and care. Things I finally gave myself when no one else would. Choosing to step away from a family that neglected me wasn't easy. It meant facing loneliness, questioning my worth, and walking a path that few around me understood. But with every step, I grew stronger and more certain of who I am. I found family in the people who showed up, friends who listened without judgment, mentors who believed in me, and a community that celebrated my growth. My parents eventually reached out again, and though I heard their apologies, I also understood that some wounds take time to heal, and some relationships need space to breathe. I forgave them, not for their sake, but for mine. Forgiveness freed me from bitterness and opened the door to peace. Most importantly, I realized that self-worth isn't something given. It's something claimed. By setting boundaries and embracing my own value, I reclaimed my life. That birthday night could have defined me by pain and rejection, but instead, it became the catalyst for my freedom. And now, every time I look in the mirror, I see a woman who survived being unseen and chose to shine anyway. My story is a reminder. Sometimes the hardest love we give is the love we give ourselves. Because in the end, that love is the one that truly saves us.